3-week period, members of the public made a series of very grisly discoveries. Dismembered body parts were found scattered across the country. The investigation that followed led detectives on a disturbing journey into the life of a savage killer who was no stranger to mutilating bodies. Matthew takes up the story of how the police caught the jigsaw man murderer, Stephen Marshall.
I was out in the tractor when something at the bottom of the field caught my eye. I thought, well, I'll stop and have a look. The bag felt heavy. I thought, well, I'll have a look inside. Realised that maybe I shouldn't look any further and went back to phone the police.
What is it? An animal or something? Doing this in space?
His expression just changed.
Feels like a tongue.
The green holdall found here in a remote area of Hertfordshire contained human flesh, a butchered leg severed at the thigh. The gruesome discovery triggered a nationwide investigation, desperately searching for answers. Who had dumped it? Why was it here? And who did the body part belong to?
Extremely unusual. A leg has been found. Is that as a direct result of a murder? Or is there some other plausible explanation, such as the leg has been removed during a medical amputation and for some reason still unknown at that time, had been left where it had been left?
The grim find was examined by a series of experts who quickly ruled out medical amputation. That left only one explanation: murder.
Dismemberment of victims isn't that rare. It isn't as rare as you'd maybe expect, but dismemberment with this degree of skill is, and that is one thing that struck us very quickly when we viewed the remains.
7 days after the first grim find came the second. An arm lying by the side of the road, dumped 25 miles from where the leg was found. Then, 2 days later, a third find.
So, they found a skull. Where? Leicestershire. What?
The initial thoughts were that must be linked to this inquiry. The difficulty being then you're looking at the geography, you think, well, has somebody really driven all the way up to Leicestershire with a head in their car, and what is the link?
Right, get Leicestershire to get the lab on it, and quickly, all right?
The link was DNA, which proved that the human remains did belong to the same person. But who? Experts sought to identify the victim by examining the skull. The results were truly shocking.
The face had been removed, so all of the skin of the scalp and the face had gone. The ears, the nose, the eyes, the tongue had been removed out of the floor of the mouth. So really you were left with a skull and some small bits of muscle still attaching to it, but everything else had gone.
The latest findings were so harrowing they couldn't be made public.
You could have just seen it, you know, the scaremongering and was this a Silence of the Lambs type incident, you know, and so it was crucial that that remained within the investigative team, that it didn't go out to general public, and that we found our offender as soon as possible.
But yet another macabre find was to come.
Forensic teams have been called in after a report that more human remains have been found in Hertfordshire.
The disturbing news of a fourth discovery was quickly followed by a fifth, this time a torso disposed of in a dike.
And with every find came new information on the victim's identity.
Right, run a check on every missing person in the country. Ian, if we find the victim, we'll find the killer.
What we managed to establish from the experts was a narrower age range of which our victim was in, his ethnicity, build, shoe size, so starting to build up a clearer picture of exactly who our victim was.
And how he died.
What?
By examining the torso, it was clear he was killed by 2 stab wounds to the back.
This brutal killing was making headlines on a daily basis. With body parts found in 2 different counties, there was massive media attention. And yet, the identity of the so-called jigsaw man remained a mystery. But that was about to change.
So, I think you need to take a look at this. We've just had a call about a missing person. He normally speaks to his mother at least once a day, and she hasn't heard from him in over a month.
Does he fit the description of the victim?
Oh, yes.
The missing man was Jeffrey Howe. When detectives ran checks on his background, they discovered he'd recently taken in 2 lodgers, Stephen Marshall and his girlfriend, Sarah Bush.
What have we got on Marshall?
Well, we know he's violent. He's currently on bail for assaulting his girlfriend.
Who's a girlfriend?
Miss Sarah Bush, 20 years old, used to work as a prostitute, which is where she met Marshall, and they became lovers.
When they needed a place to stay, Jeffrey was happy to help, but the relationship soon turned sour.
Look, Steve, you haven't got the rent, have you?
Come on, mate, you'll get it.
When?
Tonight.
Jeffrey had wanted to evict them, but was too frightened to cross them.
And can that be linked back to Howe's disappearance?
Well, I've done a background check on Marshall. You're not going to believe what I found.
Previously, Marshall had lived only a few hundred yards away from where the torso had turned up. The killer quite clearly knew the location, and it was putting the 2 and 2 together that gave us a key breakthrough.
The case against Marshall and Bush was stacking up. On the pretext of a missing persons inquiry, detectives went to question them.
I was relatively nervous myself, to be quite honest, when I knocked on the door. Answered by Sarah Bush.
Good afternoon, sir.
Shook his hands, great big hands. Sat down. He was very, very nervous. Jittery, his leg was shaking. Sarah Bush was uncomfortable. And at that point, I knew that Jeffrey Howe was going to be our victim.
Mr. Stephen Marshall, I'm arresting you on suspicion of
The couple were arrested and taken for questioning. With no time to lose, detectives compared Jeffrey's dental records with teeth found in the skull. They were an exact match and proved categorically that he was the victim. But in interview, Marshall remained calm.
Are you responsible for the killing and the dismembering of your friend Jeffrey Howe? If so, why did you kill and dismember Jeffrey Howe?
I can't.
With Marshall saying nothing, detectives needed answers.
And the clock was ticking. Detectives had just 72 hours to charge their prime suspects or watch them walk away free.
With the suspect still in custody, forensics began the painstaking search of Jeffrey's home.
It was only through thorough examination that we actually established that the flat was, in fact, the murder scene. It was heavily blood-stained areas underneath the carpet, and blood belonged to Jeffrey Howe.
The killer then moved to the ensuite bathroom to dismember the body. It was then that the cover-up began. But as he frantically wrapped the severed limbs, green fibres from his clothing were deposited on the duct tape. The same fibres were later recovered from a green T-shirt found in Marshall's bedroom.
As soon as the forensic work came back, I personally felt that we've got Marshall, and there's no way on God's earth that he'll get away with this.
Although forensics placed Marshall at the scene of the crime, he repeatedly denied the killing. It was only when detectives looked at Jeffrey's finances that the full extent of Marshall's murderous plot was uncovered.
The motive was money. The day after the killing, Marshall and Bush set about emptying Jeffrey's bank account.
We were talking about ordering food or ordering clothes from his account, selling his car.
You got the money?
I have, it's all there.
We were able to prove that Marshall and Bush were involved because both of their fingerprints were found on the receipt.
Days later, CCTV caught Marshall paying a forged cheque from Jeffrey's bank account into his own. When the spending spree was over, Marshall and Bush set about disposing of Jeffrey's body.
And one piece of key CCTV that we established was on the day when we believe that Jeff's head was deposited in Leicestershire. The key breakthrough was that the CCTV was clear enough to identify Marshall driving his car and Bush sat beside him.
At the 11th hour, both Marshall and Bush were charged with murder.
Although united in the cover-up, Marshall and Bush would later blame each other for Jeffrey's murder. But when the case came to trial, the evidence against Marshall was compelling.
One question remained. How was it that Jeffrey's body had been dismembered with such skill? A shocking revelation was to come. Marshall went on to admit to a gruesome past in which he'd cut up 4 other corpses.
I think it just showed how strong our case had been, and that Marshall really, if you like, had thrown in the towel.
Bush was acquitted of murder, but sentenced to 3 years and 9 months for perverting the course of justice. Marshall changed his plea to guilty and was sentenced to life. He will serve a minimum of 36 years.
It really is justice, not just for Jeffrey Howe's family, but for the British public, really, to know that this nasty criminal is behind bars, and he'll be an old man before he's got any chance of coming back into society.
Horrendous. And that remarkable admission coming at the end.
Yeah, it was a dramatic moment towards the end of the trial that took everyone by surprise. Marshall admitted through his barrister to dismembering 4 other people in the 1990s. An unidentified witness told the court that during this time Marshall worked for a notorious North London gang. He was what the mob like to call a cleaner, the man who gets rid of evidence after crimes. Now, the bodies were apparently brought to him after gangland hits, and he would then cut them up. Now, obviously, police now are trying to find out as much about these crimes as they can, and Marshall is central to that.
There's no surprise at all that when police started to look into his character, there was sort of violence just permeated his life, really.
Yeah, he was a frightening character who could flick like a switch to using extreme violence in all his personal relationships with people he came into conflict with people that just got in his way, and I think that's what happened with Jeffrey Howe, a rather gentle character. But Marshall decided that he could almost take over his life if he killed him. He could live in his flat, he could claim his benefits, he could steal his money. I mean, he wasn't rich, he had about £5 in his account, but for Marshall, it was enough to murder.
Police obviously pretty satisfied with this result. It's a good one, it's a big one.
Yeah, satisfied, because it was a difficult investigation, almost a back-to-front investigation. Normally with murders, you know right from the start who the victim is. Here, Marshall and Bush were in custody before the victim was identified, so real pressure on the police. But the police cracked this in 5 weeks, so pretty smart work.
Yeah, smart work. Now, here's Rav with a quick roundup.